Welcome back to Hopetales, where even the coldest nights can hide one last spark of hope waiting to rise with the dawn. The desert had always been silent at 4 a.m., but that night, the silence felt heavier as if the sand itself held its breath. Officer Mark Haines had driven that stretch of Highway 95 for 32 years. Same route, same endless line of stars, same radio static. It was supposed to be his last patrol before retirement. A quiet farewell to a life spent chasing trouble down empty roads. The sky hung low, purple fading into gray. A cold wind swept over the dunes, rattling the antennas on his cruiser. He took a slow sip of stale coffee, glanced at the clock 4:07 a.m. and smiled faintly. Just an hour more and it would all be over. He almost missed it, a single red taillight glowing faintly far off the asphalt, flickering like a dying ember. For a second, he thought it was his imagination. But then the wind shifted and the glow steadied. Out here, no one parked in the desert. Not at this hour. Haines turned the wheel, gravel crunching under the tires as his patrol car rolled off the highway. The beams cut across the sand, revealing long, uneven tracks leading deeper into the dark. His heart tightened. It looked like a vehicle had skidded off-road at high speed. He radioed dispatch out of habit. Static, no signal. For a man who'd spent decades answering distress calls, silence was the one sound that truly scared him. The sand grew softer as he drove closer. Then the headlights revealed it, a silver SUV lying on its side. Windshield cracked, smoke curling faintly from under the hood. One taillight still flickered, the other shattered. Haines stopped the cruiser, grabbed his flashlight, and stepped into the chill wind. His boots sank into the sand. The desert stretched endlessly around him, no lights. No houses, no sound but his own breathing. He shone the beam through the broken window. Inside, a man slumped over the wheel, face bloodied, unresponsive. Then behind the driver's seat movement, a small figure. The beam trembled as it found a child. No older than 7, gagged with a strip of tape, wrists bound with duct tape. The boy's eyes were wide, wet with tears, locked on the officer. Haines felt his chest tighten. He tried the door jammed. He circled to the other side, kicked until the metal bent enough to reach in. The smell of gasoline filled the air. He lifted the boy gently, cutting the tape with his utility knife, then carried him away from the wreck. The child clung to his vest, trembling. The kidnapper, whoever he was, stayed unconscious. Haines checked for a pulse. Alive but shallow. He handcuffed him instinctively, then looked toward the horizon. No signal, no sound, no hope of backup. He tried the radio again. Nothing but dry static. The boy's breathing hitched shallow, frightened, cold. The desert at night wasn't just empty. It was deadly. Temperatures dropped fast, and they were miles from the nearest road signal. Haines wrapped his jacket around the child, held him close for warmth. Then he made a choice. He couldn't wait for help that might never come. He looked toward the faint glow of the highway in the distance, a shimmer of hope across a black ocean of sand. It had to be 5 miles. Maybe more. He slung the boy over his shoulder and began to walk. Each step sank deep. The sand resisted, swallowing his boots, dragging his strength with every mile. His flashlight dimmed, then died completely. Only the stars lit their path, now pale and distant. The boy's breathing steadied against his shoulder, exhaustion winning over fear. Haines kept whispering silent words. He didn't even realize he was saying prayers. Promises, fragments of hope to keep himself moving. An hour passed. His throat burned. His muscles screamed. The desert wind picked up, sharp and cold, slicing through his sleeves. He glanced back once the wreck was gone, swallowed by darkness. Ahead, a faint shimmer the highway. But then his leg buckled. He stumbled to one knee, clutching the boy tighter. The child stirred, murmuring faintly. Haines forced himself up again, one slow step after another. The sky began to pale, night breaking into dawn. He could almost hear the hum of distant engines, the soft thump of rotors cutting through wind, but he didn't dare believe it. He lifted his free hand, waving weakly, the other still gripping the boy. The light grew stronger, blinding white against the orange dawn. A helicopter's spotlight swept over the dunes, circling, searching. He tried to shout, but only managed a rasp. He took 3 more steps before his legs finally gave out. The boy rolled gently onto the sand beside him. Haines dragged himself forward, hand trembling, touching the child's shoulder to make sure he was still breathing. He was. The helicopter descended, dust and sand swirling violently around them. The sound of shouting, boots pounding, medics rushing. As the stretcher lowered, Haines smiled faintly. The sun broke the horizon, flooding the desert with gold. He heard one medic's voice distant, muffled before the noise faded into wind again. His lips moved once more, almost soundless. "You're safe now." The desert had not forgiven the night yet. The cold sand pressed against Officer Mark Haines's boots as he trudged forward, carrying the small child securely against his chest. Each step felt heavier than the last, muscles screaming in protest, lungs burning from exertion. The boy clung tightly, silent except for occasional shivers that betrayed fear and exhaustion. Haines could feel the rapid heartbeat against his shoulder, each pulse a reminder of fragile life hanging on his endurance. The SUV he had left behind was now just a shadow swallowed by the vast, dark expanse. Smoke no longer lingered, leaving only the faint smell of burnt rubber and spilled fuel lingering in the desert air. Haines had checked the kidnapper one last time. Unconscious, breathing shallowly, his hands cuffed. The man would have to wait. There was only one priority now, the boy. The wind picked up sharp and biting. Fine grains of sand stung his face and arms, but Haines pressed on, using the jacket wrapped around the child as a buffer. He kept scanning the horizon, searching for any sign of the highway. The desert had a cruel way of making even the nearest lights seem unreachable. Hours felt like minutes, minutes like eternity. He forced his gaze forward, letting instinct and training guide his steps. Time seemed distorted in the endless night. Haines remembered every long night of patrol, every call he had answered, every life he had seen teeter on the edge. None of them compared to this. Here there was no radio signal, no backup, no sirens, only him. A child and miles of empty sand stretching in every direction. He whispered promises to the boy, quiet words that even he barely understood. "Almost there. Just a little more. You're safe. I swear." The boy's small hands gripped his shoulder tightly. He hadn't spoken since the rescue. Haines didn't know if it was fear, shock, or the exhaustion that had drained the little one completely. Every so often the child's head would dip, resting briefly on the officer's chest before rising again. Haines used those brief moments to swallow his own fatigue and continue. At one point he stumbled over a dune. His legs gave way and he nearly fell face first into the sand. The boy slid dangerously, but Haines caught him instinctively, holding him close to protect from the jolt. For a moment he sat there, heart hammering, sand cold against his knees. He allowed himself a silent pause, not for rest, but to gather strength. The faint glow of the horizon reminded him that dawn would come, even if it was slow, even if hope seemed distant. As the first pale hints of light streaked the sky, the desert transformed. Shadows stretched, dunes became more defined, and Haines could see farther than before. And then, in the distance, a faint shimmer, a ribbon of asphalt reflecting the weak sunrise. His heart surged. That was it. The highway, the lifeline, the promise of safety. He rose to his feet, shaking off the numbing cold, and continued with renewed determination. Each step became a battle against exhaustion, yet the boy's silent trust kept him moving. Haines remembered why he had chosen this life: the chance, the responsibility, the belief that no one should ever be alone in their darkest hour. Now those ideals were tested to their limits. Moments passed, each step closer to the highway revealing the harshness of the desert night. His vision blurred, legs trembling, but he refused to collapse. He could hear the faint hum of engines before he could even see the source. A helicopter. The searchlights cut through the morning haze, sweeping across the dunes, seeking the exact point where hope had clung to life. Haines raised a hand, waving desperately. The boy's head perked up slightly, recognizing the approaching salvation. The officer tried to shout, but his voice cracked, barely audible over the wind. Still, the helicopter's crew spotted them, focusing the spotlight directly on the two figures trudging through sand and shadow. Relief surged through him, but he forced himself to stay grounded, to continue the final few steps. Finally, the sand beneath his boots gave way completely. He stumbled, dropping to one knee. The boy slid gently onto the officer's lap, looking up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. Haines gripped the child tightly, whispering once more, "You're safe now. Almost there. Hold on." The helicopter descended, rotor blades churning sand and dust into a chaotic storm around them. Medics scrambled across the dunes, shouting instructions, their voices merging with the roar of the engines. Haines lifted the boy as best he could, letting the rescue team take over. Hands guided, blankets wrapped, oxygen checked, every second mattered. The boy blinked up at him, eyes searching, trust still unwavering. Haines sank to the sand beside them, chest heaving, muscles trembling violently from exertion and relief. Dawn broke fully, painting the desert in hues of gold and orange. The sky, once threateningly dark, now symbolized salvation, hope, and survival. The helicopter lifted slowly, carrying the child to safety, while Haines remained, staring at the rising sun, finally allowing himself to feel the weight of the night lifting from his shoulders. In those quiet moments, after chaos, after danger, after the struggle that had pushed both man and child to the brink, Haines understood the true measure of hope. It wasn't found in sirens, radios, or reinforcements. It was found in the determination to move forward when the world tried to stop you, to carry the fragile light through darkness, and to never surrender when life demanded courage most. The boy's faint voice called out once as the helicopter faded into the distance. Haines smiled weakly, exhausted beyond measure, but alive in spirit. He looked back at the dunes, now tranquil in the golden morning light, the wreck of the SUV hidden among shadows, a silent witness to the night's terror. The desert was still vast, still empty, but he knew that somewhere, in the quietest moments before dawn, he had made the impossible possible. One life saved, one spark of hope preserved against the odds, and in that fragile, fleeting victory, he found a sense of peace that words could not describe. The horizon glowed brighter, a silent promise that the world would continue. Chaos and calm intertwined, and that hope, even the last hope, could always find its way in the dawn. The desert was quiet again, only the rotor blades of the helicopter fading into the distance reminded Officer Mark Haines that the night's ordeal had ended. The child, wrapped in blankets, was now in the hands of paramedics, his small face pale but alive, eyes slowly opening to see the first light of dawn. Haines sank to the sand, muscles trembling, chest heaving, as the weight of exhaustion and relief washed over him in equal measure. By the time the sun fully emerged, painting the desert in gold and amber, emergency vehicles lined the highway. The boy's parents, frantic and tearful, ran toward the rescue team as soon as they arrived. Haines watched silently from a distance, letting them embrace their son, hear his laughter and cry tears of joy. He stayed in the background, a quiet guardian of the night, his duty fulfilled but unnoticed by most. Soon, local police arrived, taking statements and documenting the scene. The wrecked SUV, once a symbol of terror, now lay dormant in the sand, cordoned off for investigation. Haines handed over the unconscious kidnapper to the officers, ensuring the evidence remained intact. Even in relief, his mind raced with questions. Who had orchestrated this abduction? How had the vehicle ended up so far off-road? Every detail mattered, but there was no time to dwell. Lives had been saved, and that was paramount. The first news choppers arrived, hovering above the desert. Reporters with cameras and microphones flocked to the scene, hungry for the story of the night's miracle. Haines kept a low profile, his uniform dusty and torn, jacket damp with sweat and sand. The world would not yet know his name, but it did not matter. He had acted not for recognition, but because one life depended entirely on his courage. The boy's mother approached him eventually, tears streaking her face, eyes wide with gratitude. She barely found words. Her hands shook as she clutched Haines's forearm, whispering a broken "thank you" that carried the weight of every parent's worst nightmare. Haines smiled faintly, nodding, too exhausted to speak, yet his chest swelled with a quiet pride. This moment of safety and reunion was more than any medal could offer. As medics transported the child to the hospital, Haines began walking back toward his patrol car. The desert no longer felt hostile. The light of dawn transformed every dune into gold. Shadows retreated, leaving clarity and warmth. For the first time that night, he allowed himself to breathe freely, to feel the emptiness of the desert transform into peace. Yet his mind lingered on the boy, on the fragility of life and the narrow margins between hope and despair. But it had been Haines's instincts, experience, and sheer determination that bridged the gap between danger and survival. Every officer who heard the story later said the same thing. Mark Haines didn't just patrol that desert, he owned it that night. The media coverage was inevitable. News articles, television reports, and social media clips chronicled the miraculous desert rescue. Images of Haines trudging through sand with the child wrapped in his arms went viral, though he remained largely anonymous in the early broadcasts. Still, whispers spread through the community. The quiet officer, about to retire, had become a hero in the unlikeliest of hours. Later, at the hospital, Haines finally saw the boy again. He was wrapped in a blanket, still small, but smiling faintly as he recognized the man who had carried him to safety. The reunion was simple, unspoken. The boy reached out, gripping Haines's hand with trust and relief, and Haines knelt to meet him at eye level. In that moment, words felt unnecessary. The desert night, the struggle, the fear, it had all culminated here, in a silent understanding between rescuer and rescued. The boy's parents expressed gratitude again, offering hugs and tears, insisting on calling local authorities to recognize Haines officially. But he shook his head, smiling tiredly. Medals and accolades mattered little. That night had proven something more enduring, the quiet strength of persistence, the moral compass that refused to falter, and the knowledge that courage could illuminate even the darkest of deserts. In the days that followed, Haines returned to the empty streets of the Nevada desert. Now calm under the midday sun, he reflected on the night, the flickering tail light, the wreck, the child's small frame trembling in his arms. Every detail remained vivid, a testament to human resilience and the thin line between despair and hope. He realized that in moments of crisis, heroes were not born from ambition or fame, but from the simple decision to act when it mattered most. Finally, the precinct held a quiet ceremony. Haines was recognized by the department, colleagues clapping, media cameras flashing, but he accepted the nod with humility. He looked out over the desert one last time before retirement, imagining the dunes at night, silent, vast, dangerous, yet holding space for life, hope, and the possibility of a miracle. As the sun rose higher, painting the landscape with warmth and light, Haines thought again of the boy, of that fragile life he had carried across sand and shadow. The desert was no longer just a road, a duty, or a patrol route. It had become a monument to courage, to endurance, and to the quiet hope that could survive even the darkest night. And somewhere in the city, the boy slept safely, unaware of how close the dawn had come, or how one man's determination had carved a path through fear, exhaustion, and danger, leaving a story that would inspire long after the sun had fully risen. The desert was empty once more, but hope preserved in one life would endure forever. Weeks passed. The story of the Nevada desert rescue had traveled far beyond the state lines. Newspapers called it the miracle before dawn. Television anchors described Officer Mark Haines as a man who refused to give up, even when the desert itself seemed to swallow hope. But for Haines, life had quietly returned to the rhythm of duty, or rather, the end of it. His retirement papers had already been approved. The night he had saved the boy was supposed to be his final patrol, yet fate had written one last test in the sand, one last reason for him to stay awake a little longer. At the station, his desk sat almost bare, a few old photos, faded notes, a coffee mug that had survived a dozen years of long nights. The younger officers often stopped by, asking him to tell the story again, but Haines never dramatized it. He spoke plainly, always ending with the same line. I just did what needed to be done. That humility was what made the story timeless. One morning, a letter arrived. It was written in a child's handwriting, shaky, uneven, but heartfelt. Thank you for not letting me be afraid in the dark. Sam. Haines smiled as he read it. He hadn't known the boy's name until then. The words stirred something deeper than pride, something close to peace. That evening, as the sun began to dip below the desert horizon, Haines drove out to the same stretch of sand where it all had happened. The dunes were calm now. The wind whispered through them, reshaping the surface but unable to erase what took place there. He parked his patrol car one last time, stepped out, and watched the endless expanse before him. The desert was silent again, but this silence was different. It wasn't empty, it was sacred. He walked slowly across the familiar ground, footprints sinking into the golden dust. Somewhere here, a broken SUV had stood. Somewhere here, he had carried a frightened child through the cold. And somewhere here, just before dawn, hope had taken form, fragile, trembling yet unstoppable. He crouched down, picked up a handful of sand, and let it fall through his fingers. "I guess this place remembers," he whispered softly. Later that week, the city held a formal ceremony. The mayor, police chief, and community leaders gathered in front of a small crowd. Cameras clicked, lights flashed, and reporters leaned forward, eager to capture every second. The boy and his parents were there too, standing near the front row. Sam wore a neat little suit, eyes bright, smiling shyly when he saw Haines approach the podium. The chief began the speech. He spoke of service, sacrifice, and courage, of a man who had given 30 years to protecting others, and whose last act in uniform had saved a life against impossible odds. Then, with steady hands, he pinned a small silver medal on Haines's chest, the department's highest honor. Applause erupted. But Haines didn't look at the cameras. He turned toward the boy instead, who stood clapping with all his heart. Their eyes met just for a second, and it was enough. When the ceremony ended, Haines walked outside, away from the noise. The sky was clear, the horizon vast. The first stars were appearing. Again, the same ones that had witnessed that long night. A young reporter followed him out, holding a microphone. "Officer Haines," she asked gently, "what made you keep going that night? When everything seemed lost?" Haines smiled faintly. "Sometimes," he said, looking up at the fading light, "you don't need to see hope to believe it's there. You just keep walking until the dawn proves you right." Months later, long after his retirement, Haines moved to a small town near Lake Mead. Quiet streets, familiar faces, and sunrises that reminded him of that night. He volunteered at the local school, sometimes teaching safety lessons, sometimes just listening to children's stories. He never mentioned the rescue unless someone else brought it up, and even then, he spoke of it as if it were destiny, not heroism. On one cool morning, while helping a group of kids plant a small tree in the schoolyard, a woman approached him. It was Sam's mother. She smiled, holding a framed photo, the one taken after the rescue, with the helicopter behind them and the first light of dawn touching their faces. "He wanted you to have this," she said softly. "He says it's a picture of hope." Haines took it, studying the image. There they were, a man and a child, bound by one night of courage neither could ever forget. He nodded, touched beyond words. That photo found its place on his mantle, beside a small police badge and a desert stone he had picked up that night. Every dawn, sunlight hit the frame just right, and for a brief moment, the reflection made the faces glow as if they were still there. Walking toward safety, walking toward the dawn. Years passed. Haines grew older, quieter. People still remembered his story, sometimes mentioned it in local papers or during police academy lectures. But for him, the greatest reward was not fame or memory. It was knowing that somewhere, out there, the boy he had saved had grown up free, strong and unafraid of the dark. And on the anniversary of that night, Haines returned once more to the desert. The air was cool, the horizon painted with early light. He sat by the dunes, feeling the same wind brush against his face. Closing his eyes, he could almost hear the faint thump of helicopter blades, the whisper of his own heartbeat, the soft words he had spoken as the chopper lights cut through dawn. "You're safe now." He opened his eyes again. The desert stretched endlessly before him, silent and golden. Somewhere beyond the horizon, the sun broke free, flooding everything with light. And in that light, Mark Haines smiled. The desert had given him one last purpose, one last test, one last dawn, and he had answered it with courage and with hope.